Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast, the show for women who are seeking more fulfillment in life and simply not getting it from their current situation. We focus specifically on careers, but hey, we spend a lot of time in our careers, so making changes here will definitely create an impact in your overall happiness. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and my mission is to empower women to succeed. I believe that in order to powerfully own your career, you must decide and claim that you want to sit in the driver's seat. You must know that you deserve better and be willing to not only do the requisite work, but be willing to go out on a limb to ensure your success. Each episode focuses on profiling a leader who is clearly demonstrating ownership of their career. Join me and my guests as we explore career journeys and bring you actionable strategies to use to get into the driver's seat for your career. Because ultimately, your career is your responsibility. Let's get into the show. Greetings. It's your host, Simone Morris. Happy December. Happy everything. December has all those celebratory occasions, Hanukkah, Christmas, Kwanzaa. Wow. And it's the end of the year that, you look back and you think about what's gone well and, what are you going to do as you move into the new year? And so it's always a very reflective time of year for me. But let me talk about what I want to start this episode with, and that is some really, really good news. Yes, the podcast is 2 years old. On December 17th, we became 2 years old. That means I've been recording for 2 years, and I'm so excited because I think back to the beginning of the journey, which really started with the book, The Power of Owning Your Career, and me realizing that I really enjoyed interviewing leaders and sharing their career stories and saying to myself, I really want to continue doing that and take that message to the world. And boy, have we taken the message to the world. The thing is, we have done 90 episodes. I've recorded 90 episodes of the podcast. I get excited about data. I don't know about you, but when I see data, it's really impactful for me. And so when I looked at the data, I got excited because I thought, wow, we've done 90 episodes. You better believe when we get to 100 episodes, we're going to be doing a celebratory jig and just really celebrating that there's 100 episodes out there in the world for people to consume and take action on in terms of being in the driver's seat for your careers. So super excited about that. I'm also excited about the many countries that are listening to the podcast. I took a look at the data, and the data says that primarily the US is the major consumer of this content, but also the number 2 is France, Ireland, Germany, and Belgium. So shout out to United States, France, Ireland, Germany, Belgium. Doesn't mean that others aren't listening to the podcast in different parts of the world, but those are the top 5 locations that are listening to the podcast. Also, I always like to go back and look at what episodes people really love. And what you all really love based on the stats that I've looked at is the episode, season 2, episode 13, Be a Brand, Not an Employee. And that was a great episode with Kanika Tolver. And, I'm not surprised that that's the top episode because Kanika is doing her thing. She has her own book, Career Rehab, and just, out there shining. And so that is the top episode, most downloaded episode for the podcast. And then Marie Mann, who I'll share a little bit behind the scenes. Marie was nervous about coming on the podcast, and I assured her it would be us sitting down having a career conversation. But she did the prep work. We had a preparatory call, and she came on and just mic drop, just did her thing. I was so excited, and it was a delightful conversation. So if you haven't listened to season 2, episode 3, Get Out on a Limb and Find Your Fruit. And that's with Marie Mann. Her episode was just spectacular. I really enjoyed it. Also, season 3, episode 10, Be True to Who You Are. Wow. That's another good episode. The next episode is season 3, episode 2, Take 10 Minutes a Day. The 10 Minutes a Day one, I believe, was with Sherelle Gross, and she talks about the benefits of taking 10 minutes to recenter yourself. And that's another popular episode that's out there. And then one of my favorite episodes too is season 3, episode 8, Jump and the Net Will Appear. And I think that's with Tina Clements. And she, I feel like I need to bring Tina back on the podcast because we had such a good conversation. If you haven't listened to any of these episodes, I want to send you back to the archives, because if you love the podcast and you're wanting to just get more, go ahead and revisit these episodes. They will fill your cup up. I think season 3, episode 10, I just want to double check. I think that one is with Precious uh, Williams. I think that's what that episode is, who that episode is, but I will double check that one. But yeah, so those, if you're looking for a place to start on the podcast, those are episodes for you to jump into. Again, those top episodes are season 2, episode 13, season 2, episode 3, season 3, episode 10, season 3, episode 2, season 3, episode 8. I'm noticing a trend here. There was something going on in season 3 that I need to look back at to see what was happening in season 3, because people were really dialed into season 3. We're now on season 5, and it's exciting. Some other notes that I do want to share. This is a celebration, so I am going to get to some content to help you manage your career shortly, but I just want to look back and celebrate these key data points that have come up that just make me excited about continuing to talk about careers and the driver's seat. And I'll talk a little bit about my career in a few minutes as well. For me, the most inspiring episode that I have done so far, and it happened in season 5, was with Suba Barry. And I say that because first of all, I love all the episodes. I enjoy talking to others about their career stories, and I'm always tickled by the path that people take for success results. I pay attention to the commonalities and the differences, but the outcomes that these leaders get from what they're doing to own their career. So Suba Barry came on this season, and her episode inspired me because she talked about beating cancer 6 times. And uh, you know, it is just heartwarming, that story. When you think about adversity and thinking that you're going to die and you still are knocking it out of the park as a leader and building up teams, and she plays in not plays but her area of expertise is in an area of interest to me, and the work that I do as an inclusive leadership strategist, and really paving the way for others. That episode really inspired me. And Dawn, season 5, I'm feeling good about season 5. Season 5, I also had Dawn Reshendodi, and it took us a long time to get Dawn on the phone. Of course, Dawn has $1 million business, so I can understand why it took so long, but I'm happy that we finally got to do an interview together. And Dawn was so kind on the interview and after the interview, spending time with me and saying, how can I help you in your career? I'm just, this is a labor of love, a passion project for me. When I talk about careers, I really do get excited about helping others get into the driver's seat for their careers. And so I'm passionate. I'm so passionate about it because I spent a long time as a passenger and just being okay with what I was receiving, even though I knew that I could do better. It took me a long time to get the courage to do better. So if you're in that situation where you know in your heart of hearts that there is something bigger and greater for me, keep keep doing what you're doing, keep listening to the podcast. Let me say that, to get inspired to do what it is that you were called to do on this earth. For me, I wanted to look back at some of the questions that I was asking the guests in the early days. So one of the questions I would ask is, what is your story? Tell me highlights of how you arrived to where you are today, highlighting career defining moments. That was one of the questions that I asked guests. And my questions have changed over the seasons, but the story remains something that I'm very interested in. So I will normally say, tell us the story of how you got to the driver's seat. And I'll tell you my story of how I got to the driver's seat. How I got to the driver's seat was, it was a long journey, but I would say that I spent a great deal of time in corporate America, and I was a developer, an application developer. So I used to do coding in Lotus Notes back in the day. If you listen to the Eddie Turner interview, we talked about, being in the tech space, and I had a good moment to reminisce and laugh about that. But I was a developer, and I moved over to diversity and inclusion because I got involved in an employee resource group, and that employee resource group really changed my life. It really allowed me to find my voice. And I say that because I'm an introvert, and I was showing up in the workplace as an introvert, and I would have to work really hard to show up as an extrovert. So here are some examples. I really did not understand the concept of building relationships. Yes, I built relationships, but I think to thrive, relationships need to be on steroids, if you know what I mean. And that means that you really need to go all in on building relationships with others and to be strategic about it. But I had no idea on how to do that. I was just going with the flow. In my book, I talk about laissez-faire, about hands-off approach in terms of moving forward in my career. So I was going about my business, and I got my voice when I started leading the African Heritage Employees Group at Diageo. And that poured life into me. I really enjoyed what I was doing with that work. In fact, just this past week, I was looking at a goodbye book that they created for me, and just talked about my impact to the organization, which made me so proud, because I remember standing up in front of 100 people in Washington, D.C. and delivering a speech. And remember, I said I'm an introvert. So it just gave me different experiences. I went out of the organization, and I spoke at the Network Affinity Leadership Congress for diversity best practices. So I got an award for being an ERG, an employee resource group leader, through diversity best practices. I got to moderate a panel. I got to write for their blog, and all these different things were happening once I found my voice in the diversity and inclusion space. And icing on the cake, I was passionate about that work. So I really would say that that's a career defining moment for me. If I rewind it really far back for career defining moments, when I first graduated from college and I couldn't get a job in my area that I went to school for, I went to school for marketing. I have a marketing undergraduate degree, and then I had a associate's degree in data processing. And it's key why I highlight that, because I wanted to be a buyer, and that didn't work out. And so a career defining moment for me was realizing that I had something to fall back on. And so think about your career, and if things are not working the way you want them to work out, what is the career defining moment for you, or what is something that you can fall back on? For me at the time, it was my computer degree. And a light bulb just went off, and off I went on this long career in the tech space when I started out wanting to do retail management to be a buyer. And that didn't work out. I was able to pivot, but I didn't really connect the dots. And let me just give a shout out to Robbie Samuels, because in terms of connecting the dots, I was on the podcast on the Schmooze. If you haven't listened to the episode, go ahead and check out Robbie Samuels on the Schmooze. And in fact, I just saw this past week on LinkedIn that that's one of the top episodes for his podcast. So that makes me super excited. But we had a good conversation. The reason I'm bringing it up is because Robbie started connecting dots for me. He started peeling back the onion. This is a term that is used in corporate, peeling back the onion, asking questions about where did this leadership come from? He took me back to college and just connecting the dots. So I'm big now on paying attention to data and connecting the dots in my career. And so from a connecting the dots standpoint, I didn't know about my ability to pivot. And I'll come back to pivot in a minute. I didn't know how well I was able to pivot, but now that I look back and saw how I pivoted based on rejection, I got rejected from Macy's, their leadership development program, and I was devastated. I think in my heart, I thought that was the only opportunity. It goes to show my naivete as a college graduate, but I thought that was my only opportunity to land because I had done my internship and I didn't get into their leadership development program, and I was devastated. But I pivoted. I pivoted to my secretarial skills from high school. So I did a year as an an executive admin for a company called GTE many, many years ago. I'm dating myself, but I pivoted and I did that. And then I realized that I wasn't happy. And then I pivoted again to leverage the technology degree. The reason I'm talking about the word pivot, and that might be my word for 2020, pivot. Build the skill and have your ability to pivot. 2020, I had to pivot because I was not generating the income, the revenue that I wanted to in my business. Things weren't happening the way I wanted to in early 2020, and I was disappointed about that. Post George Floyd, I was devastated about that murder, and it took me a bit to really go inward to come back out. And so when I came back out, there were conversations that I facilitated to process race in America and what was happening, and what could I do, what was in my remit, what power did I have to create change. And so I started moderating some racism panel discussions to really educate others on what's happening, why is it happening, what can you do, let's not stay silent. And so that was really pivotal for me, because then it got me thinking about, well, wait a minute, how do I keep this going? So that goes back to the book and writing the book, and then pivoting to become a podcast host. Well, I pivoted to create a course, the Inclusion Bootcamp, and take my business on a different journey. So it's connecting the dots and of your story and getting ahead of your narrative to change the narrative. That was a conversation that I had with Valerie Gordon. She's one of the episodes that talks about how to craft your career story and the different chapters in your career. So you see, the podcast has 90 episodes of wealth of information that you can take to really help you in your career. I want to answer another question that I've asked guests over the years, and that's, how important has taking risks been to your journey? And I would say very important. Very important. Early in my career, I was not about, well, actually, I think about it. I go back to Kanika's episode where she talks about dating jobs, and she talks about that in her book as well. And so I think that I was dating jobs and not realizing that I was dating jobs. 'Cause I was a job hopper in the early days. 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, and I would move to another job. But then I got to my job at Diageo, and I stayed there almost 16 years. So, uh, I think as you get older, you change that mindset. But um, try different things. Oh, I was making a point about risk. So, in terms of risk, I believe you have to dip your water in the toe. Dip your toe in the water. Sorry. Dip your toe in the water to try different things. And I'm so proud of myself in 2020 that I've been taking different risks for greater gain. Let me share something with you. Risk is betting on yourself. If you think about going to a casino, now I do really like the slot machine at the casino. I have not been in years, but I was one of those quarter or even the penny machine at the casino. You've got to bet on yourself. You really have to put all your cards on yourself. And I would say, from a risk standpoint, I've been doing that a bit more later in my career than I did in the early days. So, in terms of taking risk in my career, I've taken risk by investing greatly in my career. I've invested in coaches, and some of our guests talk about investing in your career, investing in networks. I remember the episode with Kelly Hoey, and she talked about how impactful the Elevate network, and that's ELLEVATE network was. So, by the way, I actually listened to my podcast guests. So, I'll jot down books that they have mentioned. I'll jot down resources that they have recommended. So when Kelly Hoey came on, she talked about how impactful the Elevate network was to her career. So I went ahead and I joined Elevate, and I told a friend, join Elevate. And I've written and shared stories, and I've run a squad. So from building leadership skills, etc. The point is, I want you to be acting on the lessons that you're learning from the podcast. So I invested, that was a risk that I took. I invested in joining the Elevate network. It's not free. You have to pay either annually or monthly for a level of membership that you're comfortable with. But that's an investment in me and my career and building strategic relationships. I invested in coaches to help me become a better writer. So from a writing for large publications, shout out to Kimanzi Constable and Cindy Constable. I've invested in their program and really teaching me how to get published in larger publications. So excited that this year I've become a contributor for the entrepreneur.com platform and also for Forbes.com. I will be writing more articles for Forbes that will come out in 2021. But I say that to say you have to take a risk. And sometimes it's hard to spend the money if you don't have it. I get it. Listen, I've been there. And by the way, I was really leaning hard on corporate tuition reimbursement. So I wanted them to pay for things for me. I was always a lifelong learner and invested in learning, but I would take advantage of whatever tuition reimbursement or whatever educational dollars were there. But you also have to take your own dollar and bet on yourself. It sends a message to your brain that I believe in myself and I believe in my capabilities, and therefore I'm willing to put my money on it. And that is something that I have done in 2021. I've invested in a lot of courses in 2021 just because I think we can figure things out. It's just a longer process and journey to figuring things out yourself. I invested dollars because if someone has figured out what I want to do and they can share their lessons learned with me, then I've made the decision that I'm going to look at that material and how it can help me to grow as a leader, grow in my career. And by the way, I just want to remind you that if you're an entrepreneur, you do have a career. So this is not just about internal corporate experience where that's your career. You also have a career if you're an entrepreneur. And I'm managing my career, being in the driver's seat as an entrepreneur, but I've also done it as in the latter years of my time in corporate. And if I were to go back into corporate, I would have a very different perspective about being in the driver's seat and what is within my control. So that was a very long answer to talk about risk. I want you to bet on yourself, believe in yourself, pivot. What's happening here is I'm crafting a new formula for owning your career. Your formula will change over time based on what's happening in your life, and based on your experiences and the lessons that you've learned. So I strongly believe in taking a risk in your career to take you to the next level. I strongly believe in investing in education, big education, game-changing education, to really move the needle in your career. I want to talk about sponsors and mentors. I still believe in mentors and sponsors. I have loved the podcast because I've learned the sponsor concept is not just about you being in the corporate space or working for someone else. Even if you're an entrepreneur, you need people to sponsor you with your ideas for your business. I had someone sponsor me by presenting my course to their company, and that really benefited me because then they decided to invest in my program. And so sponsors are people who are willing to bet on you, to bet money on you, or to open up resources. I believe Denise Hamilton was on the podcast, and I believe her program is Watch Her Work. And she talked about really leveraging relationships and LinkedIn. So there's so much opportunity on the podcast to really get your mind right when it comes to taking ownership of your career. Here's what I'm planning to do in 2021. I'm planning to go back to season 1 and start listening to these 90 episodes and putting together my notes, more notes than the show notes for the lessons in there, because I guarantee you, if you take the journey through the podcast again, starting from episode 1, and take the nuggets, and not just take the nuggets, apply the nuggets to your career, you are going to see game-changing results. I guarantee it. You may have to do quite a bit of reading, because I'm very excited that all my guests have shared books, podcasts, etc., that have been game-changing resources for them. So you may have to do quite a bit of reading, but there's also lots of solid advice for you to grow in your career. What online tools have proved to be the most valuable to you in your career? I'd say LinkedIn. LinkedIn has been very valuable for me. I would say social media. Social media as an entrepreneur has been a community for me, a resourceful community that has held me up. And I've learned a lot from different groups on Facebook. I have made friends around the world online, which is amazing to me and exciting to me. Julie Kratz and I talk about not meeting each other virtually and deciding to collaborate and do a podcast together. So I don't know if you know this, but I do a second podcast. It's called the Inclusion School Podcast, and that is just very exciting to me that I like podcasting so much that I'm doing a second one. But what I think I like so much is the stories, hearing inspirational stories. So you can collaborate. So I would say the online tools is social media, as well as LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a social media site that has helped me. I have a lot of business tools that have helped me. So from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I'd say Honeybook has been a game changer for me. Really enjoy that program. QuickBooks is very helpful if you need to do finances as a entrepreneur. QuickBooks has been very good to me. Those are some of the key online tools. I would just say strongly building your community, your support system via social media has been helpful to me. And I think if I was in corporate today, leaning on social media community when I was lonely or lacking that bestie in corporate America. Well, I did have a bestie in corporate America. I had a couple that really helped me get through some things, but I would say the social media community, you don't have to look at it just as people being nosy about your business and having comments about it. It could also be a resource to you to help you grow in your career. It could be a resource to help you build relationships, etc. So LinkedIn is going to be my number one career resource that really helps me. And I tell my clients to invest the time in showing up and not being a lurker in LinkedIn. So don't just watch. If you're going to just watch, be sure to comment on content that's out there until you get comfortable to start sharing your own content. So LinkedIn is going to be that online tool that has been very valuable to me. Oh, Asana. Asana is another online tool that helps me to keep structured in my brain in terms of my goals, and that can help you in your career as well. Final question as we wrap up this celebratory episode. What advice would you give to someone wanting to successfully own their career? Your career is your responsibility. That's the game-changing advice that I got, and that caused me to pivot in my career and to get into the driver's seat. So I want to remind you, if you're not happy in your career, if you want more in your career, it is up to you to make those things happen. You need to be the driver. You need to be strategic with a plan, with partners, with really getting out there and talking about your personal brand. I love to talk about the 3 Ps for career success. So bring that all together. The advice is your career is your responsibility. And I'll pass that along because when it came to me, I received it. And I want you to receive it, that it is in fact your responsibility. People are not responding to you to help you in your career. Find the tribe that will help you to be successful and go all in on what it is you're passionate about. Bet on yourself. Get the partners to help you do that. Pivot, collaborate, take risk, all of that, and keep listening to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I've got you. We've got an excellent season ahead. I want to let you know that new episodes are going to drop at the end of January. So new episodes will be out at the end of January, but it's a perfect opportunity for you to get caught up on those 90 episodes that I talked about in a month's time. And I will be back with riveting guests. I'm going to up the ante in season 6 as we move towards that 100 episode to really deliver great, consistent content to you about being in the driver's seat for your career success. I want to wish you much success as we move towards 2021. Thank you for being a loyal listener. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and also over on the LinkedIn platform. I talked about that being that game-changing resource for me. If you head over to LinkedIn and look for the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group, that's where the after party happens for the podcast interview. I invite the guests to join us there and to have conversations. So be sure to connect that way as well. And I will be giving away, I promise, I've got books to give away as a thank you from some of our guests this season have left copies of their books. And follow the podcast because I will be providing instructions on how you can win free copies of books, career resources to help you in your career. Thanks so much. And have a wonderful end of 2020 and a delightful beginning to 2021. Thank you so much. Oh, one more thing. Be sure to leave a review for the podcast. Very important. Let's build up those reviews. So if you listen on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen, leave a review for the podcast. Again, you have my sincere thanks for being a loyal listener of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. It is my hope that you enjoyed today's episode. You can check out the show notes for this episode on the SimoneMorrisEnterprises.org website by clicking the podcast menu. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and tell a friend or two about it.